Hi everyone. Today's lesson is all about an entertaining beginning for a narrative story. You know, when an author goes to write a narrative story, they have to be sure that they capture the reader's attention right away. That's why you need to write an entertaining beginning. So how do the best stories begin? The best stories grab your attention right from the first few words. That's what makes it entertaining for the reader, which is the purpose of writing a narrative story. And you know that if the beginning is boring, guess what happens? I think you can imagine. The reader falls asleep, stops reading, closes the book, and does not want to read anymore. And so that's a problem. If you're a writer, you want to make sure that your reader is entertained and wants to keep reading your story. So let's take a look at some of these boring beginnings. One sunny day, I decided to go outside. Would you like to read a story like that? How about this one? Hi, my name is Jeffrey. I bet some of you have written a story that started that way, but you know, it can be a little boring. Hate to say it. How about this one? I woke up, I got dressed, I had breakfast. Well, you know, if you're going to head out on an adventure, I'm pretty sure that you are already awake, that you probably have your clothes on, and more than likely have had your breakfast if you're going to be heading out someplace, right? Here's another one. This is my story about going camping. All of these beginnings are boring. The reader does not want to read on, so more than likely, they'll put your story aside. Next. So, when the reader is bored, what happens? Yeah, they don't want to keep reading. They decide that they're done. Have you ever gone into the library or picked up a story and started to read it and thought, I'm not entertained at all. This is not for me. And then put it aside and tried a different one. That's what we're talking about here. So, how do we write an entertaining beginning? Remember that the entertaining beginning comes at the very beginning of the narrative writing diamond. It's a small part of the story, but it's critical to write effectively. This is where the writer's going to introduce the main character, the setting, which is where the story takes place, and the purpose or the reason for the rest of the story. And in this way, if we can do that for our reader, guess what happens? They're going to want to keep reading. So here's what authors do. It's kind of like some tricks in a little bag that they have. First of all, they might use action to write their story beginning. And when an author is going to use action, what they do is they think in their head this question: what would you do? And what that does is it helps them to put themselves inside the head of the main character of the story. And for this action beginning, they ask themselves that question: what would you do? An author might also use dialogue or exclamation. That's something that the main character might say out loud. And the productive question there, the question you're going to ask yourself as an author is, what might you say or exclaim? An author might use a thought or a question. This is something that goes on inside. So dialogue or exclamation are words that you say out loud, or the main character says out loud. A thought or a question is something that the main character thinks inside. And the productive question is there, what would you wonder or worry? And then finally, an author might use a sound. And the productive question there is, what might you hear? So each one of these techniques we're going to learn how to use so that we can entertain our reader. All right, let's take a look at this very boring beginning. This is my story about playing baseball. That's not a story that captures my attention as the reader. So let's see if we can take that boring beginning and revise it using the strategies that we've just learned. Let's start by using action. And remember, what's the reason or the purpose for the entertaining beginning? To get the reader excited about reading your story, but we also have to make sure we let the reader know who the main character is, where the story is taking place, and the main purpose for the story. So, if we're going to write an action beginning, the question we ask in our head is, what would you do? So think about that. You're going to go out, play baseball. What would you do? Would you pick up the bat? Would you walk slowly to home plate? Think about what you would do. Here's an example. I stepped up into the batter's box and tapped my bat on home plate. I was ready to play ball. That's much more exciting than, this is my story about playing baseball. And the author did a good job here. The author identified the main character, I. It's going to be a first-person narrative story about me, right? And then where does it take place? On the ball field. And what's it all about? It's all about playing ball. So that's a much more interesting beginning than the boring. Let's try another strategy. How about an exclamation? And this is where you're going to say something out loud. So the question you ask yourself is, what would you say? I wonder, what would you say? If you were going to be playing baseball, maybe you'll say something out loud like, I'm next, or I got this, right? Let's look at an example. I'm up next, I exclaimed to my best friend Jonah. I'm going to hit one out of the park, I called over my shoulder as I stepped up to the plate. Wow, that's exciting. Now I want to find out. Did he hit a home run? I don't know. It's just the beginning of the story. I don't know the rest of it at this point. But a couple of things to pay attention to. When you're writing dialogue or exclamation, you have to make sure you use quotation marks around the part that the main character speaks out loud. I'm up next. Notice how those quotation marks frame that up. And then who said it? I exclaimed it, or I said it to my best friend Jonah. And exclaimed is what we call the tagline. I exclaimed it. Because you've got to let the reader know who's talking. That's what your tagline does. So we use quotation marks around what the main character says, and then we tell the reader who said it. That's the tagline. And that's much more exciting than, this is my story about playing baseball. All right, what's our next strategy? Let's try a thought or a question. And this is where the main character has a wonder or a worry inside their head. You're thinking about something. So if you were going up to play baseball, what would you be wondering or worrying? That's the question you want to think about. Here's the example. I'm due for a big hit. I just know this will be the one, I thought as I gripped the bat tighter and got ready for the pitch. Yeah, that's a great, entertaining beginning. Gets me excited about finding out, does this main character actually get a hit? I wonder, right? That's what you want to do. You want to be thinking that way when you read your entertaining beginning. You want to think, I wonder what's going to happen next. And that's why you'll read on. Much better than, this is my story about playing baseball. All right, here's our final strategy. It's a sound. And as the author, you ask yourself, what might you hear? So what might you hear if you were playing baseball? Maybe you hear the cheers of the crowd. Maybe you'll hear the ball as it hits the bat. Whack, right? Let's see the example. Whoosh, slap. The ball hit the catcher's mitt before I even had a chance to swing. Strike one, the umpire called out as I adjusted my feet and got ready for the next pitch. Well, the main character did not get a hit yet, but it's not the end of the story, right? It's just the beginning. Much better than, this is my story about playing baseball. So when we write an entertaining beginning, we have several strategies, or I want to call them sort of like a bag of tricks, some things that you can use in order to entertain your reader. You can use action. You can use a thought or a question. You can use an exclamation or a sound. And remember, every time you use one of these strategies, there's always that productive question that goes along with it. So, action, what would you do? Thought or a question, what might you wonder or worry? Exclamation, what did you say out loud? Or a sound, what did you hear? Let's take a look now at a couple of entertaining beginnings, and I want you to think about the strategy or the technique that the author used. What was that noise? I gasped. What did the author do there? That's right, it's an exclamation. Somebody said it out loud. How do you know? Well, remember, quotation marks, and then the tagline, I gasped. Good job. How about this one? I wonder if I'll find my way back to camp. What's that? Thought or a question, right? Because you're raising a wonder or a worry in the mind of the reader. Let's try this one. I tramped along the forest path to the clearing. What's that? Yep, it's action. The main character is doing something. And then finally, snap, crack. Something was moving in the underbrush. And there's your sound. Good job. So let's review. The entertaining beginning needs to be entertaining, right? We need to get the reader excited about reading more. And an author will ask questions to help write that entertaining beginning. The question, what would you do, helps you to write action. What would you say? That's the question you ask when you want to write an exclamation. Good job. What would you wonder or worry? That helps you to write a thought or a question. And then finally, what would you hear? That helps you to write the sound. So I want you to remember, you now have all of these strategies in your bag of tricks. It's your author's bag, your toolbox. And you use these to continue to get your reader reading. You want them to get excited about the rest of your story.